Hey guys, I May Destroy You is a very important show, and we are very excited to talk about it. On the show, we love Michaela Coel and the creative, generous talent that she is, but we also want to put a trigger warning on this episode. Given the nature of this show, there will be talks about rape, trauma, and consent across all genders, sexualities, and walks of life. So, please join us along the journey. Understandable if you don't. As I continue to find resources, we will put it in the show notes and also on our website. For Australia, there's a 1-800 RESPECT hotline. I'll also add a link for a directory of organizations and resources you can tap into across Australia. In Michaela Coel's Matagat lecture, she also mentions the Havens in London and also the Survivors Trust. Let's get on with the show. Welcome, friends and lovers, to the For Your Reference podcast. You got your host, Katie.
And Dottie.
Join us as we explore sexual liberation for all within an established realm that only benefits some. Indeed. Thank you so much, friends and lovers, new and old, for joining us on this episode today. We understand that this is not easy stuff to talk about, but we're also really excited to get into it. And, you know, even in the Rafiki episode, we talked about how art changes culture and how art is culture. I would also add a prefix that art is healing culture as well. So this is a show that debuted in June of 2020. It was distributed and broadcasted from BBC One in the UK, HBO in America. We have creator, writer, and also co-director Michaela Coel. And directing as well, we have Sam Miller. He's directed, you might know him, 10 episodes of Luther, 2 episodes of Black Sails, and 2 episodes of the Snowpiercer adapted series.
He's been around.
Right. And the cast who I hope we will continue to see around, Michaela Coel, Waruchi Apia, and Papa Asiedu.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! Shout outs to Papa as well for playing Hamlet. And we do know Katie loves this Hamlet soliloquy.
Yeah, I think you just love Kenneth Branagh, mate.
And there is nothing rotten in the state of For Your Reference. I'll tell you that much, OT. So like many of our TV show episodes that we cover, we tend to gravitate towards themes, especially when characters are intersecting on those particular themes. I guess we also want to note here that this show is spawned off Michaela Coel's experiences while she was writing season 2 of her show Chewing Gum, which is a great show and recommend. You should definitely watch. But also at the same time, I found myself watching a lot of interviews with Michaela Coel and also with the cast as well. And she talks about, you know, once she had it ready and she shared it with her closest friends, they started to share stories as well. So I would say that, yes, this is the foundation of the show, but it's so multifaceted in its unfortunate trauma. And it really does try to stretch out and, you know, bring a light to many experiences across all different themes.
Yeah.
So before we completely dive into it, OT, let's get into first impressions. We are definitely partial to a Michaela Coel in the For Your Reference household. And what were your general sort of thoughts watching this show?
I'm not sure what I expected because for some reason I remember watching the trailer but not comprehending a lot of what the show was about.
It was very disorienting. Yeah.
So when we first watched the first episode and I was just sitting there thinking, oh my God, what is this? Like, it was so well written. It had taken a couple of weeks for us to really get into the show because of the backlog that we had. So it was always in our periphery. But just sitting down and watching it, we found ourselves, at least myself, just going episode after episode, having emotions and feelings that made me rightly uncomfortable.
This is the way to be uncomfortable. If that's your goal, this is how you do it.
Yeah. And we couldn't continue just because of how heavy it was. And I think we took a few hours break just to sort of separate the gravity of it all.
Yeah, we tried to take a break, but we couldn't. I think we got up to episode 5, and even at that point, there was so much emotion, and we were processing or trying to process as the episodes continued. So after 5 episodes, we gave it a break, but we just wanted to go back. Yeah. And we finished it the same day we watched it.
We finished it the same day we watched it. And that just tells you how gripping the show is. And kudos to Michaela, man. She's always been creative. And the fact that she's on this bigger platform to show herself and her skills and to share her very vulnerable story with the world is quite tremendous feat.
Well, the interesting thing, that Michaela was mentioning in interviews was she writes to be able to disassociate from it, but also it's kind of like a double-edged sword because it's also a way for her to get close to the trauma within her accepted sort of boundaries. So she can always recoil when she needs to, but she can get close enough to the trauma, but she can also disassociate herself creatively as well. A question that I have for you is only through, I actually did I joke about, I'm very facetious about my learned research, but I did actually do some research this episode. There was a lot, especially from straight men, talking about how they felt that this was confronting to them, how this show was confronting. And I guess I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Confronting. I didn't get the sense of it being confronting because I think it all boils down to the situations we've been in life. I think to me, it was wholly realizing a different aspect of, I think, some things I really didn't understand in my head of how things would transpire.
Yep.
And watching it all unfold and how it is for someone the next day was just wholly unnerving, where I was like, oh shit, I hadn't really thought too much about this. So not confronting per se, but it was more of a revelation than anything else.
Nice. So it was uncomfortable, but not confronting. Because I think, the unfortunate thing with, 140 characters equaling a whole dissertation sort of review is people automatically want to take offense as well. So, when they read something, it's like, well, not all men. Well, cool. Well, if you're not the man that this is about, then you don't need to be confronted by it.
Oh, yeah.
And it is something to consume, and it gets in the way of real discovery between yourself and others and the world that surrounds us.
Yeah.
I love Michaela Coel, and I'm so happy that we continue to see her, and she's very dutiful. She's very deliberate about the roles that she chooses. I don't think we're going to see a Robert De Niro situation or a Pacino situation where you just see her pop up and stuff just so she can be on the screens. She is very purposeful in the roles that she chooses. And, if you've been following along, the big headline was that she turned down $1 million deal with Netflix. Essentially, it was a dispute over her having even some semblance of rights to her work. And given the fact that this show is about exploitation, it felt very exploitative that they wanted to take her story and her not have any part of that, which actually denotes to the publishers later on that we see in the show trying to profiteer on this trauma, which is a disgusting thing in and of itself. And even in Michaela Coel's experiences, she was trying to figure out if she could get an extension for her deadlines. And she was essentially told by an insider, don't even bother, you're not going to get that. So even after she actually was assaulted in real life.
Yeah, it's more like, oh, poor you.
Yeah.
But when's the draft ready? When can we read the pages?
Yeah. So episode 1 and episode 2 mostly closely follows her experiences and being able to piece it together. So let's pretty much get into the show. The foundation of this show is the exploration afterwards of trauma and also consent. I do like that they talk through the nuances of consent, not to say that all of it isn't bad, but also at the same time, there are different layers to it. There are so many normalized behaviors that are not consensual, but within a world where man is king, it's okay. And we'll talk about those senses as well. But as we talk about trauma and consent, I did want to break it up into separate sections because even through the main characters of Bella, Terry, and Kwame, there are viscerally different experiences that all of them have gone down. And I think also something that's very interesting, we have concurrent trauma bonds within this show. Yes, we're following Bella and a very traumatic event that happens at the start of the series, but that doesn't mean that trauma and also joy doesn't happen around her. And I think that's also something interesting to explore. So let's start off with women. So trauma and consent in regards to women. A very poignant quote that stood out to me was something that Bella said when she was going to the support group. And she said, it was a voiceover, and she said, prior to being raped, I never took much notice of being a woman. I was busy being black and poor. So I just wanted to introduce that quote as we start to talk about Bella in regards to trauma and also consent. So we do have the main story. The start of the series does start to hinge on what happened and will we ever find out what happened. What I will say, I did appreciate that there was some level of resolved quite early in the show, because that means, unfortunately, that there was more trauma to be had in the world of I May Destroy You. Michaela Coel also talks about working with the graphic designers of the show, because when you have the intro title, it shows I May Destroy You, but then You gets cancelled. And she talks about I may destroy. Is it you yourself? Is it someone else destroying you? Or is it us collectively destroying something, a good thing? Like established systems that need to be broken. And that is something that is so great. And hopefully the turn of the coin is I may heal you as well. Not the Chris Martin one. Don't come for me, Coldplay.
Was it not I Will Fix You?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, okay, cool.
So it's a reference removed. And I will hold that up in court. Denny Crane.
Oh, wow. All right. That's enough then.
I think William Shatner is enough to start and or stop harassment.
But is it better than Donny Crane?
Yikes. What happened to Freddie Prinze Jr.?
No idea.
You put us in a very real conversation, we will still find a ridiculous reference, friends and lovers. So we've got the main story of Bella, and it was very optimistic, I guess. It's not normally a word I would use to describe myself, but it was very optimistic of me to think, oh, okay, so we're living in this world, in this story where it got wrapped up and now we can move on. But you know, even with Zane, for example, the trauma doesn't end, right? But I thought we were done with the main story. It kind of reminded me of Schitt's Creek, where we have Dan Levy's character and, you know, him having his queer relationship, and they didn't go through that hard sort of trauma bonds as well. So I just thought that's just how it was going to be. She went through that, but now she's moving on. She's dealing with other trauma, but that's it. But obviously the story is not over, and it reintroduces itself later on in the story. And I guess that's also a note as well, that even though the act is done, it can continue to live on. And I guess that's where you have support networks, whether formal or informal as well. So I want to talk about the main sort of story with Bella. I also want to talk about Zane, and I also want to talk about the lady in the clinic. Right off the bat, as much as I'm giving all of the splooshes and accolades to Michaela Coel, I've got to give it again. We see Bella as an effervescent force to be reckoned with. She is out, she is young, she loves her fucking body, which is a lot to ask for, unfortunately, in this world. She is sexually liberated. She does whatever the fuck she wants, including recreational drugs. And she's really just living in her own truth. And what I love and really appreciate about this show, the tagline wasn't because she was a slut. or because she was a whore, or because she wore this, because she did drugs, because she had sex with people whenever she wanted to have sex with people. I think a lot of the time, unfortunately, even most recently, you know, when there are stories about sexual assault, it's showing how sexually conservative someone is. So how could she be assaulted? And I'm like, no. This is a story that is in a modern age, and there's nothing wrong with that. None of that has anything to do with that, and none of that leads to whatever the rhetoric wants to be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm bored. Let's move on. Let's have some sexually progressive people just wanting to live their life. And that didn't have a factor in it. I don't know. It wasn't until that I was reflecting on the show, I noticed that she wasn't sex shamed at all.
Yeah. Which is quite progressive, if I might say. You know, it sounds shocking, but it is. You know, in our last episode of the show, we were just talking about how Keisha was kidnapped, and the whole story behind it was people not feeling sad for her because of what she did or what she posted.
She'll post like racy pics and stuff.
Or how she dressed. And that doesn't even matter. That doesn't affect anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm glad that they didn't go that route.
It's also a very interesting take to the way that they, you know, reveal the story, because a lot of the time when we see the portrayal of a sexual assault survivor, by the way, it was done in a way that was it was still within the setting of real life, if that makes sense. Like, there wasn't orchestral music where she fell to the ground. In some cases there were, but also at the same time, you know, the wheels keep turning. And Michaela was talking about when this actually happened with her. One of her good friends was at the police station with her, and, you know, they were just sitting there and they were waiting around, and she had this deeply life-changing traumatic experience, and she looked over at her friend that was there looking after her and supporting her, and he was playing Pokemon Go. So it really juxtaposed the world in which we're in. And I do like, if we can even call it grounded, I do appreciate the groundedness of this show. The same way that Bella is going through these experiences, but so is Kwame. And I guess, if you want to say to a certain extent, Terry as well.
Yeah. We get introduced to Bella's world through Simon.
Yep.
And Simon's struggling relationship as that. Because we see that they're trying to spice things up to keep the marriage afloat. They try to bring in a third partner. And in my head, I was just like, I see where this is going.
Yeah.
I see where this is going. And I know exactly what's going to happen once Michaela woke up the next morning and could remember anything. And Simon's reaction to Bella's call, I just knew something was up.
Yeah.
He was definitely hiding something. And to me, what he was hiding is that he did something with his friends that affected Bella. So I was really in for it to just see how all that transpired. And then halfway through, we just thought it was resolved and that was it. Only to be brought back by Simon and Terry having this conversation in the park and it all being revealed.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to us, when we thought Terry was such a good fucking friend.
Yeah. But I feel like, you know, I feel like I give PSAs in every podcast. If you have someone, whether it's a friend or a loved one or whomever, that is constantly checking for your life, usually they're too scared to make their own actions, and usually they're very judgmental about yours. And I feel like Terry fit very perfectly into that as well. While we're talking about Simon, it's interesting because, you know, when a new show gets introduced to me, I am going from all directions. So I was like, what the fuck is going on? Did he have something to do with what happened to Bella? And I think they did keep that disarray. Emotionally, we were experiencing it the same way Bella was, at least for the first 2 episodes. So I was questioning everything. I didn't think it was going to be, sorry, in 2020, a very straightforward thing of him stepping out on his girlfriend, right?
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be something way more complicated than that. I think in a lot of our podcast episodes, just fucking communicate. Like, I don't understand. Like, hey, I'm stepping out on you. I don't know. Is it that easy? I'm very direct, so I'm not sure how it works for other couples. But Kat is Simon's partner, and we see, I think we weren't supposed to root for her at the start. She was kind of just really abrasive when we first kind of met her. And she was really trying to get along with Alyssa when they met on the rooftop with Simon's cousin, right? Only to find out they were fucking each other for what, 6 months?
Yeah.
Already? And I don't know when we're going to get back to it. So let's talk about it now. So when Bella is trying to, piece together what happened to her that night, she finds herself at Alyssa's doorstep. Alyssa is not a fan.
Not at all.
Which is fine. If you're the side piece, I guess you don't want, that main Jennifer Hudson spotlight attention. But she didn't care for it. And then there's, at least from the point of view of the story, a second visit to Alyssa's home of Kat.
Alyssa just goes off on Kat.
Yeah.
And I think Kat just absorbed and understood every single thing. She did not need to say a single word.
Sad.
That's the moment she knew, at least, she just had to leave Simon.
Yeah.
That ship had already sailed. That marriage was sunk, mate.
All you needed was John Legend's "You're My Number One" playing in the background. You rapscallion. So let's move on to Zayn in regards to Bella. This is very interesting because as far as she understands, they're just having a good time. There was the moment in their bedroom when I thought it was weird that Zayn would even confess that he did it after they had sex.
Yeah.
I thought he would just never tell her. Because at the same time, what does you telling her, does that make you less guilty of a person? I remember when that scene happened and I don't think you felt the way that I felt watching it, or at least to the intensity that I felt it. Because as soon as he whipped that fucking condom off, I was in a rage.
Yeah.
I didn't need a podcast, as much as, if you love for your reference, but I didn't need a podcast to tell me that that was fucking wrong.
Yeah, it's definitely super wrong. And Zayn apparently did this throughout his whole sort of relationships or conquest or whatever he wanted to fucking call them.
And we also have the lady as a part of Henny House where Bella had a moment with her and you could tell that she went through a very similar experience with Zayn. So it becomes a conquest, unfortunately. And, it's where straight men are king. In this sexual dominion, and it needs to stop. It absolutely needs to stop because it very much challenges what an abuser looks like.
Yeah. One of the worst things was that the sort of textbook response that they give.
Ugh.
It's like what to do when you get caught.
Yeah.
What to say. And it was just word for word. I was like, oh, fucking hell.
But this isn't fucking infiltrating someone's Discord channel. And, they even talked about doxing in this show as well. When Bella kind of feeds into her own fumes a bit too much, they talk about doxing and potentially doxing Zayn as well. But what I will finish, I guess, in regards to Zayn is it's not just, the big violent stranger on the street that is an abuser. It could be someone or it could be someone that seems very affectionate as well. There are different types of abuse, much like the way in Training Day when I talked about it's not just people on a rooftop screaming, I'm a fucking racist, right? There are different levels of racism, the same way there are different levels of abuse. And Zayn painted such a perfect picture because you look at him, and they were cutely joking about him being from Cambridge, but it's still not a safe space. And I love that they tackled it and it's included in the show. And more than anything, especially if people aren't comfortable even talking to people they love, this can be something that can spark that sort of dialogue.
Oh, for sure. And I think one of the worst things that happened throughout this show was Henny's disregard of any sort of humanistic feelings at all.
Money fucking talks.
It's all about the money.
They made a big spectacle of firing him after, all of the viral videos. And then they let him back through the back door with a pseudonym.
Yeah.
And that, if that doesn't speak to how unfucking fair the real life and, money is, I don't know what else does, my love.
Like, at the end of the day, it's all about money.
Mm-hmm.
And Bella's insistent to talk to the author, and Henny was just shutting it down immediately without giving it any thought. I was just like, Henny's done with Bella because she's not producing at the end.
Yeah.
But apparently that wasn't the case. Henny's just a bitch, mate.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess the unfortunate thing is, as soon as Bella found out that Henny was black, she thought she was going to have this, like, maybe not camaraderie, but at least some sort of base level of understanding. And especially when Bella was asking to meet the author, it was made very clear that we may be black women, but I'm a rich one and I want to stay that.
Yup.
And I will pull the ladder under me, and you will not be climbing off my bootstraps. And it is unfortunate, but you know what? When we were watching this, the best way to summarize it is, I love how real this show is, but I also hate how real this show is.
Mm-hmm.
And, even as creatives, even as people that watch creatives, there's not a lot, unless you're a fucking lawmaker, there's not a lot that you can do to make meaningful change for generations. But what we can do is challenge our ignorances, challenge the people in our circles, the people that we go and have family dinners with. And whether that be your actual family or your maid family, we can change our inshallah worlds.
Mm.
And it's all about that reciprocity, and it's all about being open as well. The last sort of, topic that I want to focus on with Bella in regards to trauma and consent is when she goes to the clinic for the first time. For Bella and also Michaela Coel, they went and got tested quite recently after the event happened, which is also helpful to the investigations of the police as well. But what I want to speak to is the lady in the clinic. They have this exchange, and Bella's obviously rattled and she's talking through it, and the lady's like, "Oh, this is your first time?" And Bella looked very confused by that, and the lady started laughing. But it was more of a dismay. It was more of a wistful sort of laugh, because she knows that unfortunately, most likely, this won't be the last time, unfortunately, for her.
Yeah, that was really sad. I think that's one of the scenes where you go like, shit, man. It was really heavy.
Yeah.
No matter how they delivered it, you sat there thinking, Jesus. You could just wonder what exactly she's been through. So that was very dismaying.
Let's move on to Terry. Terry, as an actual character, I have a lot of problems with. But let's just focus for now in the realms of trauma and also consent. I guess it depends on how the listener or us, how we personally think about it. But on a very base level, a sexual experience should be enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Even if there is a real sense of pain, there should definitely be an overwhelming sense of pleasure. And what I also appreciate about her particular encounter in Italy is there isn't a time limit on sexual trauma, right? Because slowly she's starting to realize that she wasn't necessarily on board with everything that was going on as well.
Yeah, she was duped. Like, she thought that she was in control of a situation.
She felt like a prowess. Like,
yeah, she was straight into a threesome, and apparently it seems like these guys have done it a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
It's their technique.
Yeah.
To have that decision taken away from her as well,
Mm-hmm.
So we see her realizing this throughout the show.
Yeah.
After it had already happened, she peered through the window and saw the two girls walking away friendly, and she realized that something was off about it. But I think she didn't really just put too much thought into it. And I think throughout the whole show, that's when she starts revisiting a lot of these things. And when Kwame finally told her, like, those two guys definitely knew each other. Yeah. It was a connect for a moment. She just realized exactly what the fuck had happened.
Yeah. But there's so much there's so much layers to this. And I guess that's why I say, as a compliment, it's not just about Michaela Coel's experiences. It's bolstered in the healing of many people going through all sorts of experiences.
Yeah, it's a myriad of traumas everywhere that people face, and it's not isolated to Bella.
Yeah.
It's not isolated to Terry. We see a whole slew of women and people just going through trauma.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you know, it's how we see them trying to deal with it or how they try to survive it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to Theodora. There were two particular instances I want to talk about in regards to Theodora. It's when she was in high school. So it's one of the few sort of flashbacks that we see with Bella and also Terry in high school. And then there's also the situation between her mum and dad divorcing.
I don't know where you felt watching Theo. I felt sorry for Theo.
Yeah.
The mom is a piece of shit.
Yeah, all the pieces, yeah.
She has no right raising a kid.
Yeah.
Not even having one, to be honest. She forced Theo to lie about the dad sexually abusing him.
At the age of 7.
That shit messes up a kid.
Because at some point you believe it was true, and she mentions that.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know what the real truth was.
Yeah. And I don't know, I felt really, really sorry for her because she had to see Theo now when she was grown up and seeing what she did, I could not envision that for her at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
For someone who grew up like that, with parents and surroundings like that. And we always say, no one can fuck you up more than your fucking parents, mate.
Thank you, OT. I was about to prompt you, is what they say in showbiz. No, but it's absolutely true. And I'm pretty sure that reveal came after the high school incident. Just in case people needed that sort of understanding. And Michaela also talks about, you know, getting people to understand. And I fucking love this about her because we talked about this on the podcast a lot. Like, no one is inherently good and no one is inherently bad. As much as I will hail Satan on this podcast, no one is 100% evil, brimming firestone from hell. Right? And everyone is multifaceted. Everyone has so much, fragmented pieces that we try and put together to make us whole. Right? And Theodora is a very good example of that. Yes, it's fucked up that she orchestrated, a situation for the kid to possibly go to jail because these are actual photos of sexual acts. But at the same time, you also need to acknowledge not only the fact that she has gone through so much already, but also sharing and circulating sexual acts through pictures in this high school was normal. And we see that when Bella and Terry are talking to another student and he's like, we all do it. He was just dumb to get caught. And that is a behavior that needs to be challenged.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she cut herself and said that the kid raped her. And we see Michaela and Terry, finding these pictures or being given these pictures of apparently being in a consensual act, and that being taken to the headmaster of the school and the kid being released. And I'm like sitting there thinking those pictures were just added petrol to the fire, to be honest. If it was in my school back in fucking Africa.
Well, I think to think that kids aren't having sex and they aren't having drugs at a young age, whether that is abhorrent, whether it is morally objectionable, has nothing to do with the fact that it is a reality in some cases. It's the same thing with having sex ed classes, but the tagline is don't have sex. Like, that is not sex education. And even if there is any sort of education in schools, it doesn't have anything to do with, women. It doesn't have anything to do with queer people. It's just a guy gets a boner, so you need to cover it. And that's it.
Yep, pretty much, man.
And I guess also another layer that I want to add on Theo's story was, Bella and Terry, they have a group. They have a very close group, And I guess because of the experiences that they go through in the school, also because of the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet, as we know, they seem to have this very limited view that only Black people go through shit and not white people. So in that moment, they needed to defend that kid, as opposed to actually check in and see how Theo is doing as a woman, right? So, or as a young woman, rather. But I guess also another layer that I want to add on Theo's story, because I don't think she gets enough attention and she doesn't get enough discussion around her character. And it's definitely what I feel we should do for this show. So the other thing I would say about Theo is, yes, she lied. She actually, cut herself deliberately, but she's also from a frame of reference where she knows what she needs to do to get heard. So yes, she orchestrated the operations around it, but the truth is still there. She was taken advantage of. This kid said she loved him, and the kid was like, "Oh, you had a good time with the other guy. Why won't you do it with me?" That sort of like entitlement. Even as a young man, he still has that entitlement about him.
Yeah.
I've got a dick, and you should be grateful that I'm going to stick it in you.
Pretty much.
And to see Theo, come into her own, very unfortunately through the trauma that she went through, but to see her create that support group to want to help other people that have gone through all different credences of abuse. And something that I really appreciate was seeing the friendship form between Theo and also Bella.
Yeah.
Terry was very territorial. No, she was. And she was threatened at the fact that someone else could get close to Bella, but she also didn't understand what Bella was going through. She just wanted to cover her in love and affection without truly digging deep to hear what she went through.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. I think we have different types of people in our lives. I think Terry isn't that deep sort of friend. They'll come around and party with you in Europe or whatever. But when you have those quiet moments of vulnerability, sometimes you need a different sort of friend. And that was Theo.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to trauma and consent in the LGBT community. I do have an article here and I'll share it on our site. It's about male and LGBT survivors of sexual violence in conflict situations. I just want to read an excerpt of that. Over the past 2 decades, sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls in conflict situations has received increasing attention, leading to a marked progress in research and the development of interventions to identify survivors and support their health and protection needs. At the same time, however, the health of men, boys, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, LGBT, and other non-binary people exposed to sexual violence in conflict has been insufficiently addressed by research and the UN policy agenda. So let's talk about Kwame. I had a lot of confusion watching this show because there were whole episodes where Kwame and his experiences wasn't getting addressed. And there were moments where even if it kind of does get addressed, even after he had already explained his story to Bella and Terry, they kind of made really snide, dismissive comments on him being on that app again. And, it's a very interesting parallel. And I would say that it was deliberate, but I don't personally know, to have Bella's experiences being given so much care and love and support, and I definitely appreciate that. But also in parallel, you have Kwame sharing his experience and not receiving the same, even from his own friends, because we'll talk about the police in a second. But the fact that he has people that he loves and relies and trusts on, not fully accepting it and still finding room to judge him, is an interesting point in the story, and I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it was weird how, especially Bella for me, how she didn't take it as serious, or I didn't feel like she took it as serious as it should have been.
Yeah.
Kwame pretty much just exposed himself to them.
Yeah.
about the traumatic experiences he's been through. But
Uh-huh.
Bella was also going through a difficult process, and I think she was just removed from it a tad.
Yeah.
And I think where Terry listened, but she didn't even take it that seriously either.
Yeah.
She was there to lend an ear, give a
Mhm.
shoulder.
Yep.
Definitely much more than Bella was.
Yep.
And to me, I thought Bella would have been a better shoulder to cry on, or even give comfort to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I absolutely agree. And, you know, there's unfortunately still a lot of shame around sex in the LGBT community, whether it's inside, but in most cases outside. And we see a very micro example of this in people that he loves as well, because I think they're at the park and they're really having a cute moment and they're eating snacks and they're drinking soda pop. I think that's more of an American, not a UK or Australian term. But you know, there's a whole notion of his sexuality, and they're all just laughing over it. And I think even Bella at some point says, "I'm not straight. I just love dick." And I don't think he was given the time and attention that he deserved. An interesting question in one of the interviews that Michaela Coel had was people asking, is Kwame going to get a spin-off? And Michaela said something very interesting of, he could get a spin-off, but what would be even better is if Kwame got his own show where he was the main character and someone like Kwame wrote it. So that's a very interesting point of view, because I understand it, because as much as you try and bring people in and you try and highlight the triumphs and also the lows of particular type of people, I guess to some point there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
And Michaela has kind of done a lot already by covering other people. But there was always that question at the back of our heads asking, what about Kwame? When does he get his time? And unfortunately, he got his time, you know, if you want to put it down on and put a checkbox, when he went to the police station. But it was nowhere near the experience that Bella had with Officer Funmi and Officer Beth. Even when they came back the second time, it was cute and they were laughing and both of them were pregnant at the same time, contrasting to Officer Tom. We love you in Chewing Gum, but we don't love you in this show, sir. The way that he was so aloof about it, I would imagine, you know, the casualness of it probably would have been very similar decades ago to women coming forward, and maybe even still now. Unfortunately, he was trying to make it not a case so he didn't have to do paperwork, or maybe it was too hard for him to comprehend, or just the fact that, oh yeah, but it was consensual, yeah, you know.
I took it differently. I took it as him being given that to take the details because Kwame is a man. And they didn't even give investigators. Usually it's the job of the investigators who come and take to do the initial interview.
Yeah.
But now they sent the officer who probably just does desk jobs and goes on patrols. So that's not his remit.
Absolute bare minimum.
It's not his remit. Even he himself said, I don't usually do this. Let me go talk to my boss and see what happens. And the boss just dismissed it. He didn't even give Kwame a single time of day to talk about anything.
No, but you could see Officer Tom also had a repulsion.
Officer Tom had a repulsion.
Yeah.
Granted. But it's not his job to do that.
Yeah, you can't rely on people caring about you, because then that depends from person to person.
Even the stark difference between how Kwame's reporting and Bella going to report was so different.
Absolutely.
They closed the fucking door.
Yeah.
There's a big ass sign on the door. Please leave this closed at all times to protect the person.
And you just know that Officer Tom would have walked back into his office and said this as like a joke at a party or something.
And I think this is one, I remember in Kenya, I think I was super young. Well, not that young, but there was this story on the news where they're reporting how this guy was crying because he was being battered by a woman.
Yeah.
It's domestic abuse, but this time it's the man that's out on the street. He was literally out on the street crying.
Yeah.
He had bruises all over.
Yeah.
and it was being reported as a joke. People were laughing.
Yeah.
My family was fucking laughing.
Like, how could a man
how could a man let a woman beat him like that?
Yeah.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
Only for the next day for a women's group that usually deals with these cases in Kenya to come forward and say, hey, this shit happens on both sides.
Yeah.
And to me, when I watched it first, I was like, oh, how could this dude let a woman beat him? Come on now. And then for that story to follow up the next day, I was like, oh, okay, cool. So this shit does happen.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the imbalance that is in society.
Yeah.
So I really felt for Kwame. It was really sad how he went through it. It's not easy to come forward, but when you do put yourself out there and come forward,
you want to hope that it's going to be dealt with delicacy.
At least the decency enough for people to fucking take notes and even try and... You remember seeing Officer Tom's reaction? He's like, oh, so how will we get the evidence?
Yeah.
Oh
he
my God.
He didn't care to do anything.
Yeah.
And even when he kept asking, what's the username? What's the username? He was just doing that for shits and giggles, and he wasn't doing it as a part of the investigation.
And his cringe, the cringe on his face the whole time. I don't know, man.
Yeah, it was like it was an inconvenience for him to even do that. And even the example that you brought is like, I don't understand how a man can be beaten by a woman. Cool, but it actually happened. So now how do we deal with it?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So, and also at the same time, Officer Tom was trying to keep pushing back on the fact that, I don't think it's gaslighting, but he was just like, but you went there, you wanted to have sex. And it was like, yeah, up until that point, it was consensual until it wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I don't know if it's a reluctance of society to accept complexities to a situation because we're all fucking simple, or he just didn't want to do the paperwork. Either way, it is fucking lazy and it needs to change. Yeah. Even trying to read reports and try and get stats and, try and get observations of studies that have gone on, barely any of them include LGBT studies. Which also, I don't blame anyone, because once you get to that point, no one's fucking helping you. But also at the same time, like, resources need to be available. And like, I don't know, if you don't fucking care about anything, go and sell a fucking car. Don't be in a space where you can catastrophically ruin and continue to ruin someone's life.
Yeah. Because guess what? The next time something like that happens to Kwame, he's definitely not going to the police.
Absolutely
That's for sure.
not.
Yeah.
And I think also at the same time, you could see in the series, he was seeing that, as much as he loves Bella and Terry, they'll just never understand. And he was proven absolutely right. Even when they were in the shopping center and they were buying groceries or snacks or something, they kept, especially Bella, but she was kind of in her own trauma bubble at that moment. But they were just like, oh, are you going to fuck someone tonight? Are you on that dating app? And at first I thought that Bella didn't know, but I think the preceding scene was at the park. So they both knew, and that's how they chose to carry themselves.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, that I guess that's a story for another day. And I don't know, for me, if someone resembles that sort of unreliability, I just throw you straight in the garbage bin.
Oh,
not the recycling bin. Not the recycling bin, because you're not good for anyone. I'll put you in the garbage bin. But I don't know. There's a lot about Kwame that broke my heart. And also at the same time, you don't want him to necessarily have a perfect story either, because it is reflective of real life. And I think, like you mentioned with Terry, her talking about the threesome, Kwame also mentions at Terry's party, they're just having this exchange, and he talks, it starts off very saucy, and he talks about losing his virginity when he's walking home from school. And then he starts to realize, fuck, that actually wasn't a sexy experience. And he starts to think back on that. I just want to comment a little bit quickly on the girl on the dating app. So this is when he wants a break from men and he just wants to feel that power again.
Yeah, I think he should have been straight up. That was just weird, man. I don't know. Like, if the lady knew from the get-go that he was not straight.
Mm-hmm.
Fair enough. Going under false pretenses and then doing that and then expecting, I'm not sure what he expected, or at least how he expected her to react to that. I was fully on board with how she felt because she did feel used.
Yeah.
And fair enough, man. Like if she didn't want to see Kwame again, nothing Kwame can do about it.
Okay. I love how real we're getting on this episode. I will continue to be real with this. I feel like your sexuality is your own. So I don't personally believe that Kwame had to disclose that he is gay. What I don't agree with in regards to Kwame's actions was seeing her as an experiment. Because no matter what sexuality you are, you shouldn't be using people as an experiment.
But you have this girl thinking that this is going somewhere when Kwame fully knows that it's not, because he's just not interested in her.
But then you have the moment when they're in the bed and she makes a comment because he says the F word. And she was just saying that, how is it you're okay with people saying the N word, but you just said the F word just now? So I don't know. I'm not saying ignorant people don't have credence, but I'm also saying at the same time, she kind of showed her colors as well.
She showed her colors, fair enough. She wasn't the best person, but still, I feel like Kwame should have just been straight up regardless. Because to me, if you think that this is not going anywhere, she was probably in her head, she was thinking, oh, the next date or whatever. And then, I don't know, I just felt it was wrong and Kwame should have said something.
Oh, it was absolutely wrong. And I like that it's not just this character is going through trauma and they're going through trauma, but they can also inflict that on other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. It's very well-rounded. Let's move on to the ending and talking about revenge fantasies. I do have a quick paragraph here. The study points to the significance of feelings of injustice as an internal mechanism for evoking a desire for revenge and associated fantasies, which may endow the victim with a sense of control after the trauma. Although the natural tendency to seek revenge and revenge fantasies tend to be regarded in literature as a negative component, while the concept of forgiveness is seen as a positive step towards healing. So I don't think we've said spoiler, but there you go. We're having real conversations, so thank you for joining us, even if you haven't watched I May Destroy You. The ending, OT. I felt very frustrated at the start of episode 12, and even maybe up until like the final quarter of episode 12. I started to come to the understanding that this was Bella's way of processing that experience and everything that she's gone through. It became clear to me that these experiences were not for me. They were for Bella and whoever resonated with that. I started to realize that these were revenge fantasies and they were a way to play out, you know, her experiences and a way for her to heal. So there's 3 different instances that we have in this ending, and I want to quickly mention them and then we can talk about it. The first one has them drugging David and making him feel the same way that Bella felt. So this was the most elaborate, I think, of the fantasies, where Theo also gets involved and they start strangling, or they follow him, even to the point where he's still walking, but you can see that he's drugged because he's not responding. And he gets strangled with Bella's underwear and they put him under her bed. So that's the first revenge fantasy. The second one was actually Terry's plan, where Bella would be drugged. So she gets super, super drugged, but then she gets drugged even more. And this is a very interesting scenario, because in this one, Bella shows David a kindness because he has the chance to speak, and he says that he actually can't help it. He's actually gone to jail for it and he doesn't know what to do, possibly from his own sexual trauma. And it starts to make you question, what if your rapist is also a person, right? And this is a very interesting scenario because yourself, the people that love you, are not caring about the other person. So it definitely takes it all the way of only caring about it. Because you notice even in that fantasy sequence of the bedroom is like red as well, that Bella's not really talking in that moment.
Mm.
And I'm sure that is deliberate. The last revenge fantasy that we have is the bathroom doors open and we're seeing different scenarios throughout the series. There's one where, you see the teenagers. We also see the lady again from the clinic. The bar is empty. This time it's daytime. She buys David a drink. And this is where they have, from what we can see, consensual sex.
Mm.
She's on top as well. So I guess you could denote that to her trying to gain control, her claiming that back from him. There's a moment when she wakes up and he says, I'll leave if you want me to leave. She says, go. He leaves and the bloody body takes the ultrasound as well. We have a little bit of an inkling earlier on in the series where the therapist is walking Bella through activities that might be helpful. That's where we see in the series where she's painting, she's listening to music or podcasts or what have you. But they did touch on revenge fantasies a little bit. We also have the moment where they're at that paint and sip sort of situation where they have that fight, Bella and Kwame in particular, and she finds her way on her therapist's house. And that's where we get a very interesting insight to what Bella is experiencing, and also Michaela notes in her interviews as well, talking about everything that you don't want to deal with goes under. Everything is under and it all stays there. And in order for her to move on, in order for her to heal, she needs to deal with that.
Oh, yeah, because you also see that what's under her bed is an ultrasound.
Yeah, and that doesn't even get touched on, but I love that they included it as a point of dialogue. The more I think about this show, the more I appreciate how much it is doing for so many people that have gone through so much. The revenge fantasies are very interesting because it shows different senses and different levels of healing as well. Obviously, the last one is the most, the most balanced sort of scenario because the vices that David has, whether it's intentional or whether it's something he can't control, it is something that leaves her bedroom, her private space, as well as him taking the ultrasound. As well. So there's definitely a lot of healing that needs to be done. But something interesting that happens in the last episode is, and I'm pretty sure this isn't fantasy, I'm pretty sure this is actually part of the story, where Zane helps her with the book.
Yeah, that wasn't fantasy.
And I think that kind of denotes to the second revenge fantasy where she shows overwhelming kindness to David, right? And I guess we're all just different sort of people because I don't know if I have the capacity to forgive that deeply. Like if you've wronged me that much, and I guess that just speaks to Bella as a character.
Yeah, I was surprised that she showed that much. Well, I guess she wanted to finish the book and all that, and Zane was helpful in that regard. But show the same kindness to David, who would turn her life upside down. I don't know. It just felt a bit not revengey enough for me.
Yeah, and also at the same time, this is still a show, so it may just be that fantastical sort of element and not necessarily what people would do in real life. Or maybe it is. Who knows?
Maybe it is, yeah.
So we've already talked about reporting assault and also the support group. The only other thing that I will mention is Theo has an introduction that she mentions at the start of every support group. And something that really stuck with me was one of the last things that she said, and it was 89% of trials end in exoneration. And I don't think at that moment we realized that that was foreboding for Bella's circumstance as well, because as far as we saw, she was dealing with Zane's trauma. She was already done with the initial one. right? But I definitely just wanted to lay that out there. There are definitely more themes that get explored beyond sexual trauma. And I want us to go through that in this episode today. I want to talk about Ben, Bella's roommate. It did very much at the start of series feel like he possibly might have been the one all along, or maybe that was just me. Did you feel like
Yeah, I felt
he?
there was something off, that he did something.
Yeah, and I want to talk about loneliness because there's even a video graphic that gets shown later on in the series talking about loneliness all over the world and how people are starting to experience that. I do have an excerpt from Forbes and I just want to read it here. Nearly half of Americans always or sometimes feel alone or left out. 54% said they always or sometimes feel that no one knows them well. It's not just the US. In a nationwide survey released in October from the BBC, a third of Britons said they often feel or are very lonely. Over 65% consider television or a pet as their main source of company. In Japan, there are more than 500,000 people under 40 who haven't left their house or interacted with anyone for at least 6 months. In Canada, the share of solo households is now 28%. Across the EU, it's 34%.
Loneliness is a thing, and it was really sad just seeing Ben trying to navigate all that. And I think, in my opinion, Bella, Terry helped in them being understanding and not putting Ben in a ridiculous amount of pressure to try
Yeah.
and do something. They'd always invite him, and if he said no, they'd leave it at that, not
Yeah.
trying to pester him to do anything. We saw when they threw parties in the house, Ben would just be in his room with possibly noise cancelling headphones on,
Yeah.
just staying away from all that. And he had his gardening. It was sad just seeing him like that. By the end of the day, at least he had a friend in Bella and Terry to a degree.
I love that this show was already tackling something from a perspective that we've never seen before. So even already, she is ticking all of the boxes that we could have ever expected. I don't know. I don't know if it's one of those things where it's like you just laugh at a wife beating a husband. I don't know if the concept of around the world people feeling lonely is something that is taken seriously. Maybe with the pandemic, people are starting to realize because it's not to say that, hikikomori in Japan is deliberate, but with the pandemic, it's probably showing a lot more that it is harder for people that aren't connecting or don't even have the people that they would want to connect with to be able to. And that was something I thought was tackled really well. Excuse me, I didn't even expect that would be something that was tackled in the show. So I was always waiting for him to be that one person that was kind and we thought we could trust him. Right. But yeah, I just really love that this was outlined in the show. And like you said, Bella and Terry also spent time with him as well. And he found solace in that. And he was always waiting to have time, but not wanting to force that as well.
Yeah.
Like our lives are our own. And it is hard to try and, cultivate the life that you want, especially if you don't get to or you're not wanting to engage at that particular time.
Oh, great.
The next topic that I want to go to, I've titled it as Happy Animals. In this show, very early, it was either in the first or second or even third episode of the series, I noticed that there was a news piece that was going on in the TV in the background of the scene, and it was talking about deforestation in Africa. So I just want to quickly read a quote from the WWF site. Between 1990 and 2000, approximately 91,000 kilometers squared of forests were lost in Central Africa three times the size of Belgium. Between 2000 and 2012, East Africa lost around 6 million hectares of forest. WWF projects that the region will lose 12 million hectares between 2010 and 2030 if current trends continue. Again, a show that already tackles a lot of important topics from a very interesting and needed perspective is also covering deforestation in Africa, flooding, world hunger, and also climate change.
Yeah, and veganism as well, if you can add that to the list.
With the happy animals, if you're welcome. And I guess the best way to discuss this was at Terry's birthday, because for a lot of the series, it is quite insular to the three characters. But now we see a bit of an expansion of their world and a lot of opinions. There's a lot of opinions, especially through the vehicle of Bella being hired to be the social media influencer for Happy Animals and how it's vegan. And a lot of them had a lot of opinions about it. And I thought it was very interesting because a lot of the people were like, why the fuck do we care? And one of them was actually making very valid points, very interesting points of, you know, the white men have had this for decades. Why can't we have our Mercedes now? But now they're saying we need to get different cars. And that is a very interesting dialogue. But I also love the extra layer that this show brings, that these sort of environmental issues also affect the world, including like deforestation in Africa, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things that Happy Animals reminded me of is that you got all. We got y'all.
From Insecure.
From
Thank
Insecure.
you. We love Issa Rae. Thank you for the reference.
And I was like, oh, bloody hell. Surely. And I think one of the things that really made it seem seedy was the fact that Theo would get a better cut if she brought
yes,
a black person in to talk about veganism.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. And true to fact, a lot of the suspicions that a lot of the people had in that room at the party were right.
Yeah.
You know, and Theo came clean to Bella and she was like, you know, yeah, actually it's true. I've been, you know, I'm even getting paid more to bring you this, you know. So it's all about it's all just a facade without doing much really.
But also at the same time, I guess I just want to hear your comments on them saying who cares about these broader environmental issues when we're trying to build our own wealth.
And I get that. Like, people have been struggling for ages, and now that they have a chance to start living a life they've been envisioning, it's not sustainable anymore. So I get that point of view. I get the frustration.
Yeah, I know. I guess it's the, you know, no matter who you are, it's that conversation of how much do you want to care about that doesn't directly affect you. And I appreciate that Michaela Coel put these themes inside of the show, and I would surmise that perhaps she does care.
I'd say she does too as well.
But there's also that aspect of virtue signaling as well. Like during the Black Lives Matter movement, we've all seen that clip of that lady pretending to board up a shop, and then the boyfriend takes a picture and then they drive off in their fancy car, right? Like that's a very real scenario. And, you know, to have Bella endorse veganism, as you mentioned before, it would have brought a lot of likes and it would have brought a lot of attention, the same attention that she was eating fried chicken from.
Yep.
As well. So I guess it's also, you know, being in your power and saying you can't buy my influence. Speaking of technology, this is a very light touch, but I just want to talk about how technology plays a part. Like we mentioned at the top of this episode, we got through 5 episodes before we had to take a break from this show. And I'm pretty sure it is episode 5 where Bella is feeling very despondent. She's not connecting with Terry. She's not connecting with Kwame. And she takes some cute photos and she posts them. and there's that big heart bubble that floats towards her outside of her phone. And that might not mean a lot, but it meant a lot to me because it speaks a lot to maybe people that are younger than us, but also people that are our age that have learned to seek love through our social networks. Not the social dilemma, because we didn't care for that in the For Your Reference household. But it talks a lot to, wanting people to know that you are okay or that you've got things all together.
Yeah, and I get it. Like especially the role that technology played in her trying to regain some of the power she deemed she'd lost. Yeah, she just took to social media to a different degree. And we saw how that affected her dynamism or our friendship with Kwame and Terry.
Thank you so much, guys, for following along with us this week. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about it. I do want to finish off with a quote from Michaela Coel in her McTaggart lecture of 2018, and then we'll get into For Your Reference. In case you guys are concerned or you wanted to know, I May Destroy You did have a therapist available to the cast at all times. It also had intimacy coaches as well. To be able to deliver such a powerful message about sexual assault survival, I guess also the important thing is making sure that you're not repeating that trauma on set. So it's great to know that I May Destroy You did have it. It's unfortunate that it's not a given in the entertainment industry, but hopefully that is something that we come to see. Michaela does a lot in regards to bringing people along, Black creatives along, and, giving them that place at the table and to stay at the table as well. And this is a quote that I want to make sure that we have on our podcast where she talks about misfits.
The term misfits takes on dual notions. A misfit is one who looks at life differently. Many, however, are made into misfits because life looks at them differently. The UK's Black, Asian and ginger communities, for example. And there are many other examples. The term misfits can be cross-generational and crosses concepts of gender or culture simply by a desire for transparency, a desire to see another's point of view. Misfits who visibly fit in will sometimes find themselves merging with the mainstream for a feeling of safety. Synonyms: outsider, falcon.
All right, OT, let's do what we do around her. Let's get into a segment we call For Your Reference. OT.
If you want to get to know more of Michaela Coel stuff, I'd suggest watching Chewing Gum.
Nice. I'm going to do a future reference for us, something that we haven't watched, but I'm going to reference, OT. Black Earth Rising.
Wow.
Yep. If you want to follow us on a day-to-day in between our week-to-week podcasts, we have Twitter and Instagram at ForYourRefPod.
You can write us an email at hello@forpodcast.com.
We also have Apple Podcasts if you'd like to leave a rating and review, and we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye.